Innate Somatic Intelligence. In this module, I will cover what innate somatic intelligence actually is and how we can use that knowledge for trauma memory and processing. We'll be talking about organic systems of the soma, such as autonomic nervous system, and as well as elemental connections to our body. I'm going to be talking about trauma indicators and how to work with indicators in a non-directive approach. And I will also teach you some techniques of how to wake your own innate somatic intelligence that you will need as a therapist. And then we're going to practice also how to come into fluid presence. So let's get started. There's a beautiful short poem by John O'Donohue called Fluent. And he says, "I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding." As you see this, read this, hear this, I'd like you to sense and feel those words. They're not just pretty words, but they actually are speaking to our direct experience of our soma, our body. I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. So just feel that for a moment. So what you're beginning to tap into is your own innate somatic intelligence. We all have it. It's actually something that's inherent, like a wisdom, and that lives underneath our trauma responses. When we're talking about trauma therapy and trauma healing, we're often looking at techniques of how to regulate our clients, how to ground them, how to process the trauma memories, how to integrate them. But we also need to reconnect our clients with something so elemental, which is the deep, innate resources within their own soma, their body. Trauma kind of interrupts the essential connection with ourselves, with others, and the world. It's a disruption of all the systems that we know. And at the core of every kind of trauma is really a break with trust. The trust with our own body, the trust in connection with others, the trust with our families, with our society, with our communities. Perhaps even the trust in nature is lost. All the systems that we're naturally part of, we begin to mistrust. And that severing, that disconnection, is also severing us from something deep inherent inside of us, which is our somatic intelligence. In the ISTA work, the Innate Somatic Intelligence Trauma Therapy approach, we're actually working with reconnecting the client with what I like to call a re-remembering qualities of being that are so primordial and so innate that we actually have forgotten them. In trauma, we talk about triggers, how to work with triggers, and we'll be talking some of that. But we also need to kind of feel and sense our way back to this inherent somatic intelligence. It's the counterbalance to any trauma experience. And trauma can be anything from individual trauma, shock trauma, complex traumatization, relational trauma, collective trauma, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma. There are many different kinds of traumas. But all these traumas, what they have in common is that severing of a deep connection with that intelligence. So the ISTA work is based on some principles, and I'd like to kind of introduce you to these principles. There are 6 principles that are kind of enveloping the work and the techniques. The first one is somatic intelligence, which we'll be talking about in this module. And as I was saying earlier, this is innate, and it resides in all of us and can be accessed in the trauma healing. And the other part of somatic intelligence is that the self, the capital self, that we call our coherent self or our essential self or organic self, is actually fluid. It's not a static state of being. It's not a place. It's actually a fluid dynamic experience. And we can access that fluid dynamic experience when we begin to pay attention to the direct experience of our body. The second principle is interconnection and interdependence, that all of our experiences are actually interconnected with larger systems that are actually in unity with our community, with our planet, and with other systems that we're part of, and that all of our experiences are interconnected through time, with other humans and are also interdependent with other people's stories and events in our lives. The third principle is a relational and systems healing, and that really talks about that all our relationships and systems inside and out are in connection with one another, and that we are shaped by the systems that we're part of. We're shaped by our family, of how we grew up. We're also shaped by the time that we grew up, the country, the society, the community that we're part of. We're also shaped by the intimate relationships of our first early caregivers, our family, and then any kind of other important relationship. And so what happens in these experiences begin to create literal somatic shaping in our body. And we'll be exploring that some more. The fourth principle is adaptation and wisdom. And that speaks to that we are actually changing all the time. We are dynamic change agents. And that trauma is actually a path to wisdom. And that might sound a little counterintuitive because we think of trauma as being this difficult and horrible experience that we all would not rather have. But actually trauma, when we begin to befriend our own nervous system, when we begin to understand trauma in the context of the systems, when we begin to understand trauma in the context of our interdependence, we begin to actually understand that these experiences of the past actually have wisdom qualities we can utilize and carry forth. So this is a very important principle because most clients actually get stuck in not really understanding that their trauma experiences are really important lived experiences that have wisdom to them. The fifth principle is compassionate attunement. As the therapist, compassion is extremely important, and it's different than empathy. Compassion is really something more active. We are doing something. We are being attuning with the client. We're listening to what they need. We're listening to what wants to unfold. And we're beginning to actually help the client to come into more embodiment and shifting the different states of their trauma. And we'll be talking more about that as well. And the sixth one is embodiment. So when we begin to teach our clients that embodiment is possible, that trauma has kind of dislocated that embodiment, and we're teaching them pathways back to embodiment, it actually leads to an expanded sense of themselves, an expanded sense of consciousness. We can think of trauma as states of consciousness. And when we begin to help our client to come back into embodiment, it is an expanded state of consciousness which includes the trauma experiences, but not just exclusively locates them in trauma. So the way I'd like to use these principles, they are kind of guiding posts, they are principles that we can utilize as therapists and remind ourselves that we can locate ourselves in a wisdom principle, in a compassionate attunement principle, an embodiment principle. They are reminders that help us to guide the methodology and to kind of come back to that we all possess these qualities, and we're finding pathways back to reconnecting our client to these very essential ways of healing. So let's look at some principles kind of more in the diagram here. In the center, we have the innate somatic intelligence. As I was saying, that is innate in all of us. This is the fluid self, and that is really a primordial quality. And what I'm saying here is that underneath each trauma, we actually have this innate somatic intelligence. It's beyond story. It's an experience of the body. And it often has a quality of expansiveness, awareness, and it's empty of a narrative and identification that we have associated with trauma. On the outside, those four colors on the outside, those dots on the outside, represent the interconnection and interdependence, that our experiences are interconnected with everything. If we go the circle kind of inside, it's the relational and systems that we're part of. As I said, the family, the society, the community that we're part of. They're in relation. So we're in relation with our interconnection. We're also in relation with the systems. So these are all relational systems. And then there are the four qualities, wisdom, adaptation, embodiment, and compassion, that we need to cultivate in order to access these systems that we're connected to realize them, and also to connect with innate somatic intelligence within. So in this next segment, I'm going to invite you into waking your own somatic intelligence. I'm going to do a guided practice so you can get a feel for what I'm talking about.